TV breakfast. The clock has struck on day 120 and Ghanaians are keenly watching activities from the president as His Excellency John Dramani Mahama boldly launched his presidency with that 120-day social contract ahead of election 2024, making 25 promises meant to show urgency, accountability and a shift in governance. And as the deadline hit, what has he delivered? Yesterday, he addressed the nation and he says that what remains in the pipeline will be announced in the coming days. But what does this say about the tone of Mahama's second coming? We put all the spotlight on the government's communication chief, the Honorable Felix Kwachofosu, who is also MP for Abra Asebu Kwamankese. Honorable Minister, good morning and welcome to GBC News.
Good morning.
So on the program yesterday during the president's address, he went through almost with a fine-tooth comb every one of the promises that he has made to Ghanaians. The ratings vary depending on who you ask.
Sure.
Your party puts it well above 70% of achievement. The minority says 46%. It's a failure. But the president said more has been done than has not been done. He says promises made, promises delivered. I bet that's your verdict as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, Thelma. Let me greet you, your viewers, and express a sense of nostalgia. I remember this studio quite well.
Studio One.
The first time I came here was 30 years ago.
Okay.
Yes, I was barely in my teens. So
okay.
You had this program called Kwasasa.
Do you remember the Kwasasa Club?
I forgot it. That's 30 years ago. Kwasasa. I remember that. So that was the first time I set foot here.
Okay.
And it's good to be back.
Well, we've come a long way.
Absolutely. Yeah, but in between then, I've been here many times as well to do other business, this time related to politics and governance.
And now you are here as sector minister.
Absolutely. So
we fall under you now.
Such is the vicissitudes of life.
Changing scenes.
Absolutely.
Let's hear it.
All right. So what it is that President Mahama engaged the people of Ghana in the run-up to the 2024 elections. You know, before any leader wins the mandate of the people must understand why it is even necessary to vote for that particular person. So he made specific commitments. And in order to codify those commitments so that it does not become as though these things were said in jest and that we didn't mean them or we said them in the heat of the campaign, we put together a manifesto which essentially details what we intend to do once we win political power. Now, often leaders commit themselves to the first 100 days. There are a few things that you do to signal a certain intent, to stick to the promises that you've made in the manifesto, and also to address some pressing matters that require urgent attention. Now, President Mahama thought that 120 days was a more realistic time frame within which you can do more substantive things. So he committed himself to doing certain things in 120 days. So if you read the NDC manifesto, in the very first pages, you see these promises clearly outlined. And each one of those is measurable. It is not, these are not vague, interminable promises. They are promises that are measurable. When they are achieved, you will see them. So in order to account to the people, the president thought it necessary to do the broadcast he did yesterday. There are those who requested that perhaps if he had met the media, it would have been a better way to do it. He will meet the media eventually. He is not one who is camera shy. He's a friend of the media. Even when he was in opposition, he subjected himself to media scrutiny. So eventually, he will meet the media. But he thought that now it was necessary to engage the people through this medium and outline what has been done in the period that he's been president. So if you go through them, I think there are 25 of such promises. And each one can be measured in terms of what has been done. So the first one that he said he would do was to nominate within the first 14 days the complete list of cabinet ministers for parliamentary approval. Now he has done this, and he has done it in record time. It is the earliest time that any president has been able to do the nomination and have the nominees vetted and approved by parliament and sworn into office. That has been achieved. Now, closely related to that was the commitment he made with the second promise that he will constitute the leanest and most efficient government. Because in the run-up to the 2024 elections, one of the problems that had ensued and which Ghanaians expressed concerns about was the sheer size of government. The government at the time had not too long ago, installed 126 ministers. Now, the government came under criticism. People thought that it was excessive, and I didn't need that large number in order to run the government. So President Mahama committed to reducing this substantially in order that we make savings that you can channel into other areas. Also, a smaller number allows for greater efficiency, which means that you do more with less resources, and therefore it was necessary to do this. Now,
well, some people on that,
sure.
Minister, some people say that even though we have achieved the number, in fact, we're working with 54 or 56 with 4 outstanding, measuring efficiency is something else entirely. So what's the blueprint for saying that on efficiency side, you've also taken
absolutely
apart
so
from the
so for instance, the president
side.
promised 60, but he's actually done 56, which is the smallest government size ever in the history of the Fourth
How's that
Republic.
translating into?
Absolutely. Now, 2 things arise from that. The first are the tangible savings that you make in terms of resources that would otherwise have gone to finance the operations and activities of a large size government. So let me give you an example. So I am a Minister for Government Communications. I also double as the President's spokesperson. Now, in the past, just before we came to power, if you went to the presidency, to manage the President's communication outfit alone, there were 28 people. And we know this because the governor of the day submitted a list to Parliament in compliance with Ghanaian law. 28 people. When you come to the presidency today, there is me, there's your friend Shamima, and then there are 5 others who help to manage the president's communication. The same team manage the entire government communications. Now, in addition to the 28 people who manage the presidency's communication, if you went into the Ministry of Information, there were 76 people, the minister, his deputy, and 74 directors and other employees. So if you put all of this together, you had 106 people managing government communication, and that's what the president. Now, all that is done by 7 people. Now, for those who are familiar with what it takes to keep a minister in place and have the minister work throughout the year, if you take salaries, all the things that the minister is entitled to, you add vehicles, you add bungalows, support staff, and all that. On the average, the government spends about 15 million Ghana cedis on a minister in the 4 years that he's in office. So if in the past you had 126, and today you have 56, which is a difference of about 69, if I'm not mistaken, you see that tens of millions of Ghana cedis have been saved because of this activity alone.
What has happened to the staff of those, for example, Ministry of Information,
yes, first of all,
who now do not?
No, what has happened is that
ministry.
So they are reassigned to agencies. You see, invariably there are always gaps in the numbers of personnel that government agencies need. In order to fill that, they employ people. That's why there's yearly recruitment into the civil and public service. The reason why people are recruited is that there's vacancy. People need to fill it. But because the ministry was scrapped, rather than go and employ people, these people have been sent to fill the gaps. So only 2 days ago, one of the top management level people at the Ministry of Information was reassigned to an agency that needed her expertise. Otherwise, that agency would have gone to employ another person in addition to this person to incur more costs for us. So that is what has happened. And through that, savings are made. Efficiency is also achieved by the output. Now, if 106 people were managing government communication and 7 people are doing the same job, you see clearly that we are doing more with far less resources. And that is how you measure efficiency. So there can be no dispute that it is beneficial. The tens of millions of Ghana cedis that I refer to has been saved can be put into many other things. They can go into repairing roads, building schools. As I speak today, schools in my constituency are demanding boreholes. Now, if you channel some of those resources, you can address those problems, which serve very useful purposes. So it is always important to point out that you don't need a legion of people to manage government communication or manage government's outputs. And that legion of people often becomes a drain on the public purse. For a country that has gone into the economic difficulties that we've been in recent years, the last thing you need is to waste money on a large number
Your
of
friends
people.
on the other side have made the point that what you've lacked in terms of numbers of ministers and their deputies, you're making up for in appointments to other agencies. How do you respond to that?
That is simply untrue. There are agencies that are statutory in nature. Even the number of people you employ is spelled out in law, so you can't do anything about it. The civil service, of course, there's a conversation about even the size of the civil service. It's a long-standing conversation. But what people have complained about the most are political appointments and the way that the discretion has been abused. I mean, for crying out loud, what did we need 125 or 126 ministers for? It was not necessary. There were ministries that were completely unnecessary. For instance, there was a procurement ministry. When every government agency has a procurement unit, there was even a procurement authority charged with responsibility for overseeing public procurement.
At the time, because there were notable gaps in our procurement
But those gaps were not going to be filled by appointing a minister. If there were gaps, where are the gaps coming from? Is it by way of legislation? Are there gaps in the legislation that govern procurement? Or are the institutional arrangements inadequate? So you plug those, but you don't create another agency that drains the public purse. So if you look at the numbers overall, you see that it is less. And indeed, if you look at the budget, you see that there have been significant cuts, goods and services and capital expenditure. All of them have gone out. In the office of the president alone, over 400 million Ghana cedis has been saved because of the cuts that have been. Why? If you have 28 people, you have to cater for the work that they do. And that necessarily imposes additional costs. Now you have 7. So naturally, your cost is going to reduce.
Okay.
And that is exactly how that has happened.
Okay.
Now, if we come back to the promises, if you look at the third promise, establish a robust code of conduct and standards for all government officers. I think that 2 days ago or so, the president launched the code of conduct.
And that has become very topical because people are asking, 20K is the limit.
Yes.
A day? A week?
No.
A month?
What is it is that ministers don't legislate who comes to them with their gifts. We have a cultural phenomenon where people believe that they have to show generosity. So someone can give you something. There are those who also believe that for promotional purposes, if they have a product and a high-profile personality is seen to be associated, it convinces the general public to buy into that product. So
like an endorsement?
Absolutely. Well, not necessarily an endorsement per se. So for instance, if there's a phone like this one,
if you have it, it is seen as an endorsement of the product.
It is perceived as,
then it's
it has a good quality, so let me go also get one. So people do that. For instance, I am an MP, so you go to the constituency, chiefs give you gifts such as goods. In fact, there are days when I would wake up in the constituency and there will be people at my gate with baskets of cassava and plantain and all that. They just think that they need to show appreciation to the MP who is doing a good job for them and all that. Those things are there. There are limits of gifts that can influence you. I mean, you are a public servant. You have a certain standard of life. There are things that will move you. You understand me? There are also things that may get you thinking. So if somebody gives you an item below a certain amount, it is not likely to influence how you conduct yourself in terms of your professional output. There are also certain gifts that are given you that compromises your ability to exercise judgment in certain situations. So we determined that a gift of below 20,000 Ghana cedis is unlikely to move someone of the caliber of a minister. Because you know exactly the society you live in and the kind of people who become ministers. A gift of 20,000 is not likely. But anything above that may impair the person's judgment. Now, because it is cultural, it is difficult to legislate. You cannot divine into the future and know who will be bringing you something. But there are clear rules that ensure that you don't compromise yourself in the process. So if you are brought a gift of a certain value, the rule is that, first of all, you must declare that Thelma has given me this phone worth this much. And then, because it is worth this much, and it is likely to impair my judgment, I must surrender it so that I don't own it. So that it is no longer a gift to me. It's a gift to the state, which is, in the scheme of things, insignificant in terms of the size.
Then what happens to it? So
it goes to the state.
30,000 Ghana cedi gift.
Yes.
I surrender it, and then what?
So it goes into the state coffers and it uses it for whatever the state deems necessary. But it is not an individual who profits.
So it's not a daily rate. It's not an
daily rate. It's
not a monthly rate.
No. It's not. It is based on who is bringing what. So if you bring me this, and it is assessed, and it is deemed to be above 20,000, I must declare it immediately. If I am found not to have declared and presented it to the state, I am liable for severe punishment, as the president highlighted. So the limit has been determined based on our circumstance and what we perceive or believe to be what can influence someone to act one way or the other. There are other countries where it is $50, $100, $200, depending on their own situation. So that is all that is. Now, these standards are necessary in order that public officers' conduct is regulated. Because if you don't set standards, people may not even know. There are people who are coming to government for the first time. They may not be aware that this is unacceptable. They may think that was a normal course of activity, but they may not be aware that it is unlawful. So in order to put it beyond doubt and not leave anybody with any ambiguous thinking, this has been done. So now you know that if you do this, it comes at a certain consequence. Now, one of the key aspects of this was the issue of acquisition of public assets by public officials. In the past, we've been dogged with allegations of public officials retaining interest in state property. So there are some who buy their vehicles when they are leaving office. There are some who go for state lands and other kinds of property. Now, this is not right. It is unethical. It is improper. It amounts to abusing office, using your office for private profit. So the president has clearly outlawed it and said that nobody in his government will be permitted to do that sort of thing. And that even if you are caught in the process and have not completed it, you are immediately going to be dismissed. So that is necessary. And I think that it is a good thing. Some have said that it should be codified. It should be made law. We do not disagree with that. I think that there may be opportunity to do so. Some have also argued that if you don't do that, governments that succeed us may throw it away. But I wonder how any government can come to power and disagree.
Because even the Constitution has provisions for how public officials should conduct themselves. So if that's the Constitution, 92, is not working, how is a government conduct
two things
or
arise.
code of conduct
Two things arise. The first point is
difference?
that some of those provisions are scattered. They are not brought together in one document. So sometimes it's even difficult for people who may not necessarily be inclined to legal learning to even appreciate that this exists. And then bringing it together makes it easier for public officials to be clear.
But is it legally binding?
No, this one is a code of conduct that binds people in President Mahama's government. He is the final authority.
So it's a moral code?
It is not a moral code. It is a code that is binding. In other words, if you violate it, it is just like this your organization. It's not everything here that is law per se, but I'm sure there are ethical standards. Even how you conduct yourself in the studio. They may outlaw eating, for instance, in the studio. It is not there's no law in Ghana that says that if you eat in a room, you will go to jail or you'll be punished. But your organization does not permit people to come and eat here. You can't drink some things here. You can't make noise while the program is on. You can't quarrel with your colleague. It is not law. But you cannot be engaged in an exchange, a heated exchange with your colleague whilst you are on air. You understand me? So those are things you do to regulate the conduct of people here so that you have a smooth sailing production, which is not disrupted. This one too is like that. In other words, the president says that if you are part of my government, these are rules. This one is without prejudice to any other laws. For instance, asset declaration, for instance, is in the Constitution. It's also in the asset declaration. There's a law on asset declaration.
Has anyone lost their job? Because the president said, if you haven't done it by now, and May 6th has gone.
Of course, the deadline was yesterday.
Yes.
So today,
is anyone losing their job?
Well, once it is determined that you have violated it, you will face the sanction. But the first point of call is to get the Auditor General to furnish the presidency with a list
of persons who have
done or have not done it, and then based on that, the president will take a decision.
So, is it that if you haven't complied, you pay the 4 months or your 3 month salary into Mahama Cares, or is it losing your job? Because I've heard two things here.
Yes, I think that I must explain it properly. You recall that on 18th February, President Mahama himself symbolically invited the Auditor General to his office and declared this as it was a way to encourage public officials to do, because for many years there are those who have flouted this rule. Some feign ignorance, they say they don't know. Others also say that they didn't think that it covered them, especially CEOs and people who are not necessarily ministers and MPs. Some genuinely believe that it doesn't cover me because I'm not a minister. So the president did that to highlight the importance of that activity and to remind everybody who was bound by it to perform that task. After that, he said that as of 18 February, anybody who had been appointed or nominated had up to 31st March to declare their assets. Now, after the deadline, the presidency requested for an update on what had happened to that admonition. And when it was examined, it came to light that there were a number of people who had not complied. For those people, the president said that for breaching the 31st deadline, you are going to pay 3 months' salary to Mahama case, in addition to 1 month that I have actually asked all appointees to pay anyway. So you will suffer a penalty of 4 months for breaching this rule. However, if by the close of yesterday, you had still failed to declare it, then the sanction is that I'm going to dismiss you. But to ascertain that, you need to have an update again from the Auditor General.
Okay.
And then you'll be able to tell. So as and when that update comes in,
all right,
people will know what the direction is.
If I may, with your indulgence, talk about a few specifics.
Sure,
And let's
sure.
start with job creation.
Sure.
A key part of the 120-day contract was to create avenues for jobs to be created, especially for young people. So
Yes.
we've seen government launching a number of initiatives. Beyond launches, have you actually created, have any jobs actually started that you can pinpoint? And are there figures that you can share with us on how many jobs you've created in 120 days?
So, of course, I doubt if anybody realistically expects that job creation outcomes will come to fruition after 120 days. What it is that the promise was to initiate job creation opportunities. So the chunk of our population that belong to the youth bracket are those most affected by unemployment. So it is the duty of government to find ways to absorb this youth bulge and get them working, so that the danger that it poses to society, if you have that large number of people not working, is mitigated. So we noticed that there are a number of ways that this could be done. One of the sectors that many young people are interested in the most is ICT. People feel that is a way that you can obtain skills that will help you in terms of finding a job or even creating job opportunities for yourself. So we had what we call this 1 million coders program. Even though we call it 1 million coders program, it is not the case that 1 million people are going to be trading coding. There's a whole gamut of activity within the ICT technology sector that they can go into: web hosting, web designing, and other kinds of things. This was launched barely a month ago, if I'm not mistaken. As of last week, 151,000 applicants had put in applications. As I speak to you, there's a pilot in 4 regions to test how this will go in order to fine-tune it for national rollout, and that is currently ongoing. One of the ways also that we think we can address the problem of unemployment is to create job owners as opposed to job seekers. Because when a young person owns a business, he is even more likely to have the capacity to employ other young people. So then the pressure on government is substantially reduced. So we have this thing we call a Jumera, which is a business incubation program aimed at nurturing the next set of business owners. So 10,000 businesses are going to be targeted. They are going to be taken through training and they'll be offered support. Out of these, 2,000 of the most viable proposals will actually be supported with cash incentives and other incentives to set them up as businesses. The expectation is that if we did this on a yearly basis, in the next 4 years or so, we should have close to 20,000 additional jobs created, whilst at the same time setting up businesses that can grow and achieve any level of development over the period. So that has also been done. And as I speak to you, I'm aware that applications are flying in. It has to go through a certain vetting process. It has to go through so that you set up the system properly. Once that is achieved, you will find that it will be rolled out. And
a transparency plan as well.
Absolutely.
To ensure that, like some would suspect or some would allege, jobs are being reserved for party faithful and party grassroots at the expense of other Ghanaians.
Not at all. That is why the portal was made public. So anybody who is interested can apply. You must meet certain standards, whether you are MPP, CPP, UPP, whatever it is that you are. It's immaterial. But nobody will demand your party card. What will be demanded is proof that there is a viable business proposition and that you have the capacity to manage it effectively to ensure that it does not go down the drain and waste public funds. So that is the only criteria. It is not partisan. Technology is blind. When you apply, they won't even know what you look like until perhaps you upload a photograph or you show up for some specific assessment. So I think that the public needs to be assured that this is not a partisan, but there's no point, because the threat that unemployment poses is colorblind. If an MPP unemployed youth poses a threat, that same threat is posed by an NDC unemployed youth. So if you resolve the problem for an NDC person and the MPP person still poses a threat, that threat will materialize at a certain point where you've not met the expectation. So I don't think that we should politicize that at all.
Right.
Then there's also the National Apprenticeship Program, which for now is the biggest of all. And the issue is that there are many who seek white-collar jobs. Of course, they are entitled to do so. But you and I know that opportunities are limited, both within the public and private sectors. Even as the public sector expands, the private sector thrives. You expect that jobs will be created there. There are also people who are interested in acquiring skills that they can use to fend for themselves. So there are people who want to go into dressmaking, some want to be welders, some want to be masons, electricians, and what have you, painters and what have you. So we thought it necessary to have a system where we train these youth in various vocational skills that enables them set up on their own. For example, if you train a painter, you don't need to give the painter a shop. What he needs is to establish contacts with people who want to paint their houses, and he gets the job done. A dressmaker might well require a little shop by the roadside or in her house and make dresses and earn income. A welder, once they weld metals and join them together, is able to generate some income. An auto mechanic is able to repair vehicles and generate income. So every step of the way, these skills enable those who acquire it to earn income. And we expect that in the next 4 years, up to 500,000 youth will be trained. And if you look at Ghana's unemployment figures, currently it stands at almost 2 million Ghana cedis. If we are able to take out 500,000, that will be a significant improvement on the situation. Now, this year we are starting with 10,000, and it will be scaled up. By the next 4 years, we should go to 500,000.
What's all these?
Yes, and 300 million Ghana cedis has been allocated for it. So it is currently, that one too, a portal has been put up. People are being encouraged to apply.
Okay. And
once that happens, and the president highlighted yesterday his desire to see significant involvement of women, because often we leave out women when we are designing these matters. So there's a affirmative action policy that says up to 40% and beyond.
He said 45% women, yes, and an extra 5% for persons with disability.
That's an important.
Why should we trust that when even on the cabinet appointment side we were promised a certain number or a percentage of women, but which for some critics we have not been able, the government was not able to deliver? Why should we trust that?
Well, I think that
this 45%?
The circumstances are different.
Okay.
Sometimes the criteria you need to compose cabinet makes it difficult to achieve that, because you just don't need to balance gender. You have to balance religion, ethnicity, and certain social interests. So sometimes it's pretty difficult to get that. You need to find one person who meets all the criteria, and it's difficult. But when it comes to vocational skills, indeed, I would argue that women perhaps may even dominate, because they are the ones who show greater interest.
Because I'm asking myself yesterday, 45%, is that the majority?
Well, it's not the majority, but I even anticipate, based on my own experience. I am an MP. In the run-up to the 2 elections I've contested in, I've also rolled out a similar apprenticeship program. Indeed, if I'm not mistaken, I've equipped about 2,000 youth in Abra Asebu Kwamankese with vocational skills, mostly dressmaking. Now, the majority of those who took part were women. So naturally, women are more inclined to obtain vocational skills than men are. So even though the president has said that there should be a minimum of 45%, it is most likely that we may even cross that based on the level of interest that people show in it. So this is something that we are committed to. And for our brothers and sisters who unfortunately suffer some impairment, physical impairment, allocation of 5% has been made for them. This is also to ensure that we bring everybody on board, even as we roll out some of these programs. And this will be strictly enforced in the way that this policy is rolled out.
Yeah. About the roadmap for reintroducing the tolls back on the roads, yes, because a key number of persons with disability were employed in that sector. Now that the idea is to bring a digitalized form of that, what are the conversations around job opportunities for persons with disability? Well,
it is work in progress. And I would like to believe that government is mindful of that and will make the necessary accommodation for sections of society that are vulnerable, who were predominantly involved in this sort of activity. Yeah.
Also, when we talk about, employment, your friends on the minority side are quick to condemn government's decision to dismiss individuals employed in the public sector after the December 7 election. And for them, it is saying, giving with one hand and taking it back with another, to say you are committed to creating jobs when people have been appointed to job positions and then you have withdrawn them and you are coming back to say we are creating more jobs.
You see, when you set the job creation opportunities we intend to roll out, against what you are referring to, there's such a misnomer. We are talking 500,000, 20,000, 10,000. The people who are affected by the revocation exercise are 12,000. So even if we were just to look at numbers, you see that there's no basis for comparison. But the point is that
12,000 lives.
Absolutely, but I'm coming to the point. The point is that things must be done properly. You understand me? If you want to employ somebody, do it properly. Do it with regularity. Let it be above board. You cannot unlawfully engage in activity that bring people into the civil service, impose additional charges on the public purse, and then say that it should be allowed to stand. As I speak to you, there's actually a revocation committee made up of various stakeholders going through each and every case with a fine comb to ascertain the regularity of what happened. You recall that in the aftermath of the elections, when the transition team first met, I was the spokesperson for the president-elect side, and I was the first person to broach the subject that, look, we had noticed these irregular employment, last-minute employments. The government had 8 years to employ everybody in there to employ. Right after the elections, there was a flurry of activity, and it was highly irregular.
Some say it wasn't the first time, and that has happened at the end of previous administration.
Yes, but the same government that said they had the right to do so, this insisted that it should not be done. In fact, they insisted that every employment had to be subjected to debate and agreement. So
payback?
But no, there was no payback. We had noticed that not only was this thing being done in a hurry, it was being done unlawfully too. There were people who didn't even put in any application process and were employed. This was establishment. It's a well-structured organization. Anybody who is employed there, and I'm sure you went through the same, you have to go through a certain process. You put in an application. Sometimes there's an advertisement. You put in an application indicating what your skills are and what you want to do. If you are deemed to have passed that stage, then you are invited for an interview to assess your aptitude. Not so. After that, then you are issued formally with a letter which spells out your conditions of service, and then you work in the organization. There were instances where there was no advertisement, no application was put in by anybody. Then people are called to come for interviews. There are some of them who didn't even go through mandatory medical checks. And when we noticed it, we said that no, halt it, let us discuss it, let us understand what is happening. They said no, they had authority to do so. So you recall that, I think sometime around 17 December, 18 December, I issued a statement conveying our position that if these things are not halted and the irregularity continues, we will be compelled to reverse them. It's a matter of public record. So it's not like we just got up and did this. When we came into power, indeed, we looked into the matters and saw that indeed our fears had been confirmed and that this irregularity occurred. So the decision was that then all those who were employed within that period should be made to step aside, pending inquiries into how they were employed. As I speak to you, there's a revocation committee on which organized labor itself is represented. So once that is done, and it is found that indeed there are people who actually went through the system fairly and due process was established, they will be recalled to continue. Yes.
I have just one more question on employment creation, and then we can get perhaps into other things. The 24-hour economy.
Yes.
3 shifts, 3 jobs, 3 people, right? 1 job, 3 shifts, and the 3 hours.
Definitely.
How many 3 of those have we had? Because Ghana Publishing Company Limited says it's gone 24 hours. We've heard a part of the passport operations also going 24.
That is true.
But are we actually seeing the 333 that you proposed?
Exactly. What happens is that even in your organization, of course, you have been running 24/7.
Yep.
Indeed, when I was a child, I think you used to operate for only 4 hours. After you did Koliko and the likes, then there was 4 hours of broadcast, and then at a certain point, it goes off. But for many years now, you've been doing it 24 hours. The night shift also ensures that people come here to work, because when you leave, there are programs that take place in the dead of night. That's when people need to man. So you need additional hands. If you compare what you used to do, those days when you used to run 4 hours, to what you do now, you see that the staff strength has increased. Indeed, your Director General has long lamented the understaffing that you suffer. He argues that you need additional 700 hands or so in order to run effectively as a media organization. You also know that you don't even have presence in the new regions that have been created. And to get presence there, you need additional hands. So that is what happens when you expand your operations. And that is precisely what is happening. Every organization that runs 24/7 requires addition, because the human body cannot go 24 hours without rest unless you want to take an early trip into your grave. So naturally, there will be the need for additional, and all these companies have had to employ additional. And you heard the president saying that the Ghana Police Service is setting up a 24-hour unit, which requires additional tens of thousands of men and women to render security services in that regard. So that is a natural indication that this is what is going to happen. Now, the intent, or one of the intents behind the 24-hour economy, is to expand our productive base, which then leads to an expansion in the economy. When you do that, you create room for additional employment. I use myself as an example. In my second year at the university in K University, it was a requirement for us to go and do industrial attachment. So I was fortunate to go on attachment at GASEM. I was a chemistry student, and my job description was essentially to go to the grinding mills where they grind the cement, to go and take samples every hour and test for certain properties. So I went to work at 8 a.m. and close at 5. At 5 o'clock, before I left, the one who was to relieve me had to show up. He also works till midnight, and another person comes to man the lab until I return in the morning. So that's a company that was even doing it. And because they needed to do it around the clock to ensure efficiency, they had to employ more. Otherwise, I would be the only person to do it. At 5 o'clock, I close and the place shuts down. So it is natural that if you are doing production around the clock, you get more. Now, regarding the implementation of the policy itself, we committed ourselves to beginning the process of that. And again, we must stress that it is not an event. Sometimes, as our friends in the NPP like to cast it, it is not an event. It's a process that will ensure sustainable, round-the-clock economic activity. To do that, you need to set up the systems and structures. And one of the problems we've had, especially with the NPP, was their penchant for ad hoc policy making. Not much planning goes into it. So we found out that for some time, even when they are still in power, the programs collapse. One of them was SNAPCO. Ad hoc, one village, one dam. Where are the dams? Even this IPEP, that only duplicated the activities of this assembly. They didn't see much light of day. But we believe that we need to set up the system properly. And you didn't have time ahead of the election or in the lead up to the election, before the election, and then the winning. No, but you cannot make policy in opposition. Ready. You cannot, and then implement. You cannot make policy. You cannot make policy in opposition. It is not done. What you can have is a plan, an intent. When you come into power, you now have the resources of the state at your disposal. You know exactly what you've met. Nobody will come and give you in opposition a briefing on the state of the economy, the state of unemployment, the state of electricity, and whatever. It doesn't happen. So it is only when you've come into power that you know the true measure of things. Then you make policy. If you make policy in opposition, how are you going to implement it? Is that policy ready now? That's yes. 24 hours. I am a member of cabinet, so I can tell you for free that the coordinator, Mr. Guzitano, who is one of the finest brains we have in this country, has done a lot of work. He has briefed cabinet on 3 separate occasions. He has legislation ready. If you look at the president's briefing yesterday, if you read the text and you listen to him, he speaks about the GIPC Act on the verge of being amended, the Labour Act on the verge of being amended. That has been done. Even funding. So there are discussions with Development Bank Ghana to ensure that we get funding to take off. Mr. Guzitano has also briefed Parliament, the people's representative, just before we rose after the last session. He briefed us on steps that have been taken. So once Parliament comes back, legislation will be slapped in that ensures that this 24-hour economy has the necessary legal backing to do what has to be done. A secretariat has been set up and work is ongoing to ensure that they function fully. So once the rollout begins, you will find that this thing will come to fruition. Now, closely related to the 24-hour economy is the Accelerated Export Development Council. You recall that on Monday, after the launch of the Code of Conduct, that council was also inaugurated. It is chaired by the president himself, and it shows a level of seriousness. The president doesn't chair many committees. With the exception of the National Security Council and Cabinet, he doesn't chair any other committee. So when the president says, I'm chairing a committee, you know that he means business. And with presidential backing, nobody on that committee will dare do anything that runs contrary to the objectives that have been set. It also has institutional representation because there are already organizations. There's a Ghana Export Development Authority that is involved in promotion of export. They also have representation. Private sector players also have representation. And other organizations who have a common objective with government to ensure that we grow our export sector. Now, the objective is to ensure that both traditional and non-traditional exports are boosted. Now, the more we export, the more foreign exchange we get, which then shores up our currency. And recently, you've seen the performance of the cedi. I read an article in Bloomberg yesterday, which said that the cedi is perhaps the best performing currency in the world. The reason for that is that we are doing a lot of gold exports. Because of the gold board, we are able to mobilize more gold that otherwise would have gone through illegal channels and found its way abroad. So we are able to export more, and that gives us significant amounts of foreign exchange, which the central bank then keeps in its reserves to back our currency. And that is why now the cedi is selling at 13 cedis, and people are panicking and are releasing the dollars that they have. So that is what happens if your export sector is strong. And that is actually the reason why the president is so keen on chairing this council himself to oversee our export sector. Now, if exports are performing, it also means that there is economic expansion. Economic expansion requires more hands to keep rolling. And that also means then that those of our comrades or compatriots who are unemployed currently also find opportunities to get employed. So these two are related. As you produce more, you meet your needs first. When you meet your needs and there's excess, the best thing to do is to export to others who may not have that capacity to produce those things. So that is what, so there's an integrated policy, well thought out plan designed to ensure that we claw back losses that we've made in the past as a country and as an economy.
Let's focus on energy for a minute.
Sure. When
we put the flyer out yesterday, that you'll be sitting with us today, one of the concerns that kept coming up was doomsday in the fact that for a lot of people, intermittent power supply has become the norm. What's the president's, plan for making sure that that does not continue for those who think that way, that Mahama came back and with him came doomsday?
Well, that is propaganda that needs to be dismissed. You see, we need to be fair to the facts. The very first day President Mahama took office, his very first day, he convened a high-level meeting. I was in that meeting. And the subject was a major crisis in the energy sector. When we were leaving power in 2016, we had redundant capacity that we didn't even need immediately. As I speak to you, capacity meets demand exactly without reserve capacity. If you don't have that, the system trips frequently. All you need is supplied, and nothing is left for when there's a breakdown or there's some emergency. So when that happens, the system trips often, and that is why you have those intermittent outages. Again, there's humongous debts, 80 billion Ghana cedis. ECD alone owes 63 billion Ghana cedis. They collect far less than they spend to produce the power. So they are always at a loss. Indeed, this year alone, the finance minister has had to give them 28 billion Ghana cedis, which could have been used to do other things, to enhance people's livelihoods, so that they can pay part of their debts. IPPs alone, at the time we took power, were owed close to $2 billion, and $2 billion at the time was over 30 billion Ghana cedis. When you have a situation like this, you are going to have difficulty. So we inherited a very chaotic, poorly managed energy sector. It takes a bit of time to manage it. One of the concerns that has emerged is the issue of fuel. Fuel is pretty expensive. So some of these power plants, they use heavy fuel. Some of them use light crude and what have you. Now those fuels are expensive. When we built the Etuabo gas plant in 2014, it relieved us of $300 million of fuel imports. So it lightened the load a bit. Currently, government is considering plans to build a second gas processing plant, which will take gas production to a higher level. Gas is cheaper, and so when you generate with gas, you don't incur significant costs, which then enables you to manage the system and sector properly. So it is regrettable that we have these power outages, but it is not because anybody has returned with this. It is because those who we left the country for in the last 8 years completely mismanaged the sector. It was on the verge of collapse. And these are facts contained in the budget. They cannot deny it. So it is a matter that will be addressed. There's no planned load shedding per se. Otherwise, a timetable will be published. We are not like others who will ask you to go and publish your own timetable. If there's load shedding, a timetable will be published so that you can plan your life. But because of the peculiar nature of the system and the very, very, very small margin of error, the system trips quite often. But that is being addressed. Sometimes, too, there are unforeseen events like the power outbreak at the Jowulu bulk station over the weekend. That one naturally will result in some outage, which then is restored after the problem is fixed. So it is we understand the concerns of the people. The president is concerned about it. It is something that he constantly works on together with the minister and other stakeholders, to ensure that
we truly needed like 2 hours for this conversation, because there's a few things that I wanted to get into in education with regards to, you know, the academic user fee and the free distribution of sanitary towels, which were also key campaign promises. But I wonder if we could touch briefly on Galamsey. And yesterday the president spent a substantial amount of time detailing some of what has been done to make sure that we fight the illegal mining currently devastating our water bodies. But critics say that despite all these efforts, they are a replication of stuff that's been done in the past by the previous administration, and that tangible results are not clear as to how far we've come with the Galamsey fight. The Blue initiatives that you've launched and that you've started implementing have also not brought the needed clear signals of a change in the situation in any way. Would you agree?
No, there's no way I can agree to such a narrative. It is a narrative that is deeply flawed and not premised on available facts. You see, the first issue is that the reason why Galamsey persisted to the extent that it did before we came to power is that there was governmental complicity without a shadow of doubt. There were people, in fact, there's actually a former government official who is standing trial because the OSP took him to court for involvement in Galamsey. That has not happened under the NDC. There's no person involved in the NDC government who is doing that. Indeed, President Mahama has made it clear that the day he gets a whiff of information that any of his appointees is involved in Galamsey, that very day, not only will the person be dismissed, but he will be prosecuted as well. In fact, he says that even legal mining, if you are his appointee, you cannot engage in it, let alone illegal mining.
The results?
So I'm coming to show you the results. First of all, Galamsey is not as pervasive as it used to be just a few months ago before he took power. The reason that there's an intense fight, and I'm going to list for you things that have happened. When we came to power, barely a month into our administration, we revoked all new mining leases that were awarded because the majority of them were done irregularly. That was the first step, because people who had connections to politicians and the government were exploiting this to engage in illegal mining. So we put a halt to it. So no new mining leases will be issued in the foreseeable future. And all those that were issued before we came to power have been revoked to the extent that we find that there is basis to do so. That was the first step. The second step is that currently, as we speak, illegal mining, or if you like mining, is regulated by laws. So to be able to deal with any upsurge in illegal mining, you need to have the necessary laws. One of the concerns that had emerged is that there's an LI 2462, that gave the president power to give mining leases to companies to mine in forest reserves. Now, the intent of the framers of the law was that at some point in our life, it may become necessary for national interest reasons to go into a forest reserve to do sustainable mining, because there may be a vital natural resource that we need as a nation. So it is a very limited dispensation given to persons who have the technical capability to mine sustainably for a specific national interest reason. Unfortunately, this was abused by the past government, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry, to the extent that they found favor with the government, was given a lot. So you find even leading figures in the MPP at the time. There's a company called Akonta Mining, owned by their former Ashanti Regional Chairman. Recently, you see that their license has been revoked. And as I speak to you, there are processes underway to take legal action against it.
The promise was to repeal LI 2460.
Just a minute. So I've told you the defect with the law. The problem with the law says a lot of things. But there's a provision there that enables the president to give licenses to people to go into forest reserves to mine. That was a problem. You understand me? So to address it, you take out, once you take out that power, that law does not permit anybody to go in. So there's really no issue.
But you're not calling for a repeal anymore. You're asking for an amendment.
But I'm explaining to you what it is.
Okay.
Okay. So you are wearing a pink dress, but there's a stain on the pink dress. Do you remove the dress, or if it is a stain you can remove immediately, you go for the stain? Once you go for the stain, there's no problem. So the problem is the stain, not the dress.
So you've changed your mind about
No, there's no mounting. You look at the law. What can you do to ensure that the problem, what is the objective? The objective is that nobody should be able to go into a forest reserve to mine. Is that not so? What was it that was enabling people to go into the forest reserve to mine? The president had power to give them license. If the president no longer has power to give you a license, you can't go there. So the problem is resolved. Second, there's what we call a Minerals and Mining Act 2003, Act 703. That is a more robust law. And in that law, there will be an amendment that completely bans mining in forest reserves, completely. So there is no caveat. It doesn't matter the sort of resources that are in that forest reserve and how beneficial it can be to Ghana. You simply cannot enter. So the Attorney General is working on an amendment of that. When that happens, nobody can, no matter who he is, can set foot in a forest reserve. Once that happens, the problem is also, you don't even need to repeat the whole law, but you have addressed the defect that was being exploited by unscrupulous politicians to do damage to our environment. Now, the other issue that you mentioned about the Blue Water Initiative. So there are those who erroneously get the impression that that is supposed to recruit young men and women who will be armed to go and square off with the bandits who are heavily armed and are operating in these. For that is not the idea. They are to guard the water bodies and serve as sounding bells and people who monitor. So the moment they notice any activity that is prejudicial to the integrity of the river or its bed, they alert appropriate authorities. The entity that has the most capacity to deal with these bandits are the military. So they relay information in the. Now we rely on you journalists to inform us that there are people who have entered this foreign reserve, but we need a more consistent approach. So you have people, boots, nothing. Yes, there's technology, but nothing beats boots on the ground. Human intervention that alerts you to some impending danger. So once they pick up the signal, they relay it, and the requisite force provided by the military is sent in. And indeed, you see that in recent times there have been significant gains. In fact, since we came to power, as I speak to you, there are 71 people who have been arrested for dabbling in galamsey and are going through legal processes for prosecution. 150 excavators and vehicles, some including guns, have been seized because of the operations of the military. Only last week there were reports, or is it earlier this week, there were reports of some people masquerading as national security operatives who had entered a place to do galamsey. As I speak to, 6 people have been arrested because of that activity. And then I need to reach the president's warning to everybody, whether you are his daughter or his sister or a prominent member of the NDC or a member of his government. If you get involved in galamsey and think that because you are a heavyweight in the NDC or you are prominent in government, you can do this, then the president will deal squarely with you to the extent that he picks information that you engage in it. So anybody who says nothing has happened in galamsey will not be true to the fact. Yes, one understands the anxiety that the devastation, the horrific destruction of the environment has caused. It is natural that people will be suspicious if they don't see a certain outcome within a certain time. That is natural. People have a right to feel that way. But the president also has immutable commitment towards addressing. That's why he has taken these severe measures to ensure that we safeguard the environment. And in the fullness of time, you will see that the outcomes will begin to emerge. But even now, it is clear that galamsey is not as pervasive as before. The reason for that is that there's leadership that has expressly prohibited governmental complicity in the act. Okay. And again, the president has said that as far as he's concerned, the policy of his government is that galamsey is terrorism. We view those who engage in galamsey the same way we view persons who are part of terrorist groups, because they engage in environmental terrorism and endanger and imperil our collective future. And then the final point, we promised to do what we call Trees for Life, which is a reforestation program. Indeed, on 21st March, I was the president in Nkawie in the Ashanti region to launch it. It's a program that is going to ensure the planting of millions of trees to recover areas that we've lost because of galamsey. So there's a lot of activity. Mind you, there's a government that has been in power for just 4 months. Okay. It is not practical to expect that in 4 months you address a problem that has lasted for years. But what is evident as I speak is clear commitment, systems, processes to deal with the problem. That is precisely what we are doing. Even before you came into power, you gave us this 120-day contract to be like a marking scheme. Absolutely. And to take off whichever one we thought that you had implemented. So we had a scorecard to keep track of your activities. Beyond 121 days, what's the broad roadmap for the government activities, and what should we mark you on
with regards to, for example, the COVID-19 levy, that bill has still not been laid before Parliament. Yesterday, the President said it's tied so much with our VAT and our conversations with the IMF. We have to sit with it until September, from what he said. So which other benchmark should we now use as a yardstick to measure your performance, for example, in the first year in office?
So it's an important question. First of all, the overall framework under which we operate is a manifesto. The manifesto is a broader document than just the 120 day commitment. The 120 day commitment is just the first 4 months. But we are in power for 4 years. So we made commitments that will last. Some may even overlap, because sometimes you need to engage in long-term planning. So you don't just start a policy and think that if for any reason you leave government, you live with it. It should outlast you. So there are programs that have a gestation period beyond
a sustainability plan.
Absolutely. A gestation period beyond the 4 years that we have. And it is all well and good. There are things that we inherited from the previous government that we are continuing. And that is how it should be. So that is the framework within which you should be assessed. Now we've done only 4 months, which means that it is those commitments we made in the 4 months that you can hold us to. Now, there are some of the things that are being done that are not necessarily public. So when you look at it, you will think that it's not been done. For instance, it's about reforming the scholarship regime. Again, I'm able to tell you that on 16th April, the Education Minister, under whose purview the scholarship secretariat functions, brought an amendment bill that would ensure that we set up what we call the Ghana Scholarship Authority to streamline the way that scholarships are awarded. It seeks to take away the favoritism and partisanship that persons who have influence are able to find their way. There are people who actually don't need scholarships, but because they have influential parents and other guardians, they get it. So that bill is there. Now, that is where government's work ends. The rest is for Parliament. I'm also a member of Parliament. So I know that the moment Parliament resumes, that bill will be tabled and we will look at it. There are also things like the amendment of the customs law to ensure that salvage vehicles are back on the front burner. You know, it was banned in favor of assembly of vehicles here. It is not bad to assemble vehicles here, but there are also people within our society whose livelihoods depend on how they are able to retrofit these salvage vehicles. So that one to work is ongoing.
And there are also Kai people and the Guta and
absolutely, we are extremely excited about
because
this.
Citizen engagement is important.
So indeed, it is good that you mentioned. So the Trade Minister, who has supervisory control over this, has been engaging these stakeholders. He has submitted a report, which is now with the Finance Minister. So the Finance Minister now has to put that in a bill to take to Parliament in order to seek leave of Parliament to ensure that we can have salvage vehicles back in there. There are others too that have a similar, even the LI on mining, LI 2462, was tabled on 20th March in Parliament. The moment we resume, we'll finalize it and then it becomes law. So if you look at that, you see that there's not a single promise we made that we've not taken action on. There are some that we've done full, it is clear. Others too, because of the involvement of external parties. In other words, agencies that necessarily don't fall under government and they have a role like Parliament. You do your bit, and in respect of that, all that we need to do has been done. The ones that require legislation have been done. There's one about revamping SOEs, which is the last promise that we actually made in the 120-day commitments. You recall that the President has held a meeting with SIGA, the State Interest and Governance Authority, and then CEOs of state-owned enterprises. He has made it clear to them that he's not going to tolerate the recurring losses that they incur. In fact, I can also tell you that the President has been having discussions with the stock exchange. The stock exchange itself, apparently, even before we came to government, had been taking steps to woo these state-owned enterprises to list. So they've brought a list of 10 top-performing SOEs and recommended to the President to ensure that they are listed. And you see, when you list on the stock exchange, there are stringent corporate governance rules that you must follow.
Comply.
Many SOEs don't like going there because they don't want to follow those rules. The President is compelling them to go.
Will we know which 10
Yes,
SOEs
in fact, it will be published very soon. They are in the process of finalizing it. So very soon you will know.
Because you brought yourself.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm volunteering information. But it shows you that a lot of work is ongoing. It is not something that the public is aware of. So you may think that that box has not been ticked. That's why I'm highlighting. But very soon, it will be published. The President is keen on allowing this. And once that happens, you see that corporate governance improves. It is the lack of proper corporate governance culture that leads to the losses. Last week, we heard of one head of an SOE under the previous government who was taking 40,000 Ghana cedis every weekend. If you run an organization like that, How are you going to turn out profits? So more properly managed entity will allow this without clear checks and balances. So, and then we all know the waste, the nepotism. So he's the CEO, so his daughter, everybody related to him, his friends, everybody must get employment there, even when they don't need it. You understand me? So this is being done with a view to ensuring that we stop or mitigate the losses that these, because when they go into a loss, it is government that has to put in money.
I have,
yes.
You know,
the government has even said that there are some of them that need to be done away with entirely. Others too need to merge because they are too small to be viable. And all of that is being done.
And times have changed, so some people need like an upgrading to be able to meet up.
Yes, and so that is what you do. You see, to do that, you need to force them to comply with certain standards. If you go onto the stock exchange, you cannot afford to lag behind because you'll be kicked out.
What's government's plan for GBC? You brought yourself.
Oh, in fact, I've been having lengthy discussions with your director. I'm sure after this program, I'll have discussions with him as well. I think GBC, you've done well. I'm impressed with your studio. When I came here 30 years ago, the story was entirely different. You have potential, which needs to be tapped. So I'm engaged with your Director General, of course, in conjunction with the NMC, to see how we modernize you. There are needs that you have. But you also have to be up and doing. You understand me? There will not be any largesse from government without corresponding evidence of improvement in the corporate culture and the things that need to be done to ensure that you are, because by every standard, you are the leading broadcaster in Ghana.
So explain to me, if we are the leading broadcaster in Ghana, why government would engage private services when the state itself has this organization called the GBC
that is something that needs
for
to be
its state function?
But you see, what has to happen is that you have to be up and you see, you don't have to presume that merely because you are state-owned, you will remain competitive. You must remain competitive. If the service can be done better by a private service vendor, that is Ghanaian, and we see that despite promptings and efforts to get you to come to the same level, you are lagging behind, then people will be compelled to make a decision otherwise. So you must justify your keep. For instance, the salary you are earning, your Director General will be watching and be looking out to see whether your performance is up to scratch compared to your competitors who also have money issues. So very soon, if you don't live up to scratch or you don't perform to his satisfaction, he may go and tap somebody from the private sector to replace you. That is exactly what. So when I say that the government is not going to be a Father Christmas, we are not going to throw largesse at you, that's what I mean. You must earn your keep. But I must commend you. I don't think there's any media organization in Ghana that is as professional as you. Even your conduct, the way you've asked the questions, shows a lot of professionalism, which you should leverage to stay ahead of the curve all the time. Also, you have reached. As I speak to you, the people in Abu Dhabi are watching me, so they are buzzing my phone with messages. But it is not every station that they get there. So you have a competitive advantage immediately because all they know is you. So you must tailor your products and services such that they stick with you. In the event that one of your competitors is able to penetrate the market, they will still stick with you. So you have a role to play. And we also take our responsibility as government seriously. There's also a regulator, which is the NMC. So you find that we cannot just get up and come to GBC without real cost to them. All of that has to be sorted. So the relationship between us, your regulator, and yourself has to be smoothened out. And then in recent times too, every now and then I pick signals of some unrest relating to labor agitation. Now I would urge all of you to calm down. The first point of call if you have a problem is to go to the person you think can resolve the problem. So you must come to the one that owns this entity, which is government. We own it in trust for the people of Ghana. So you come and articulate your concerns that I don't like Telma's pink shirt, so sack her. You understand me? Then we review it and see, but there's nothing wrong with wearing a pink dress. So this one we cannot do. But if they come and say, oh, Telma is unprofessional, she comes to work late. When you give her assignments, she doesn't do it. She's rude to her bosses. She doesn't relate well with her colleagues. Then there might be something to look into. You understand me? But you must not say that because you disagree with Telma or there are things that she does that you don't like, you are going to invade the studio to insist that she shouldn't broadcast. That cannot be allowed. You understand me? So I want a situation where you dominate the space, because the more you dominate the space, the more advantage we get as government, because then revenues will come in. I'm sure you know that when you come to the sectors that I control, yourself, ISD and GNA, you are the biggest amongst them. About all of the revenue that you use, save some aspects of compensation, come from your IGF. The more IGF you get, the less money I put into you. And the IGF is dwindling by the day because the cost of equipping GBC
and that is a worry.
That is a worry to me, because then I have to go and find the money to come and give you.
Because we pay salaries, but then the day-to-day running of GBC
so
is
we are saying the same thing. What I'm saying is this.
TV license is not coming in.
So it is up to you to do things to ensure that people are willing to pay TV. You see, the same content you have, others have. So what will make them choose you ahead of them? It is a cutting edge that you bring. If you are able to show programs that interest them. For instance, I've wondered why you have these historical archives of world-class programming. When I was a child, anytime I heard that there was going to be I Told You So, there was no way I would miss it. It doesn't matter the time of day that you show it. It is a classic. You have movies like Kukurantumi. Even By the Far Side. I didn't miss it, what do you call it? Indeed, I must indicate that I auditioned once to get onto it. I failed merciless. I failed miserably.
So your skill is not in acting?
Absolutely. So clearly I found my calling.
Yeah, you found your calling elsewhere.
But you can package that content. You understand me?
Okay.
And these days there are technologies to even remaster it and make the pictures sharp and crisper. You can package that. My children have not heard about I Told You So before. But trust me, if they see it, they will watch it.
I need to let you go because I know that you have other things to do.
To wrap up, I think that you have potential that remains untapped. The better you do, the happier I am. Because if your IGF can take off very soon, if you have enough IGF to pay yourself, it means that we don't have to pay compensation. We can channel it into so we as a government have a vested interest in GBC doing well, even ahead of other competitors. So we will continue to support you to ensure that.
I've stolen 5 minutes to talk about home matters, but here's the opportunity. The next 120 days, in a minute, what should be the expectation of Ghanaians? I
think that the same approach that we've used to take off these boxes, that everybody agrees that there's not a single of these promises that we've not touched or we cannot give account of in terms of what we've done. The same approach and more will go into delivering the rest of the content in our manifesto. And again, I must indicate that we are to be measured by the commitments that we made. Of course, there are other issues that we may not necessarily have committed to, but along the line, it becomes, for instance, we didn't promise that in the first 120 days, the city will go to 13 cities. But when we came to power and there was opportunity to work to ensure that we have done it. So along the line, new challenges may emerge which will require attention. We commit to doing that. But overall, President Mahama is committed to ensuring that we run a government that delivers for the people. You see the discipline that he's brought into governance, and the transparency, the accountability, the modesty that he has injected into government, and the efficiency, and the desire he has to save cost. Look at what he did with the independence celebration, for instance. If we had done it at the Independence Square, it would have cost us 20 million Ghana cedis. We did it at Flagstaff House. It cost us 1.5 million Ghana cedis. So we saved 90% of the cost. Today, when President Mahama travels, he goes with 4 people. Minimal cost. There are people who are traveling with 20 people. You understand me? So all of these things are small things that point to greater things ahead. And we commit in the next 120 days. In fact, we didn't make any additional 120-day commitment, but I think that we commit to the next 4 years to delivering on our mandate. By the time the 4 years are over, an objective assessment, and I'm sure you will invite me here to come and render account, an objective assessment of our performance against what we promised will show that we indeed have lived up to expectation. And the life of the average Ghanaian should improve. That will be the test of whether we have succeeded or we have failed.
Well, thank you for sitting with us this morning and for getting us some more details of the government's first 120 days in office and the prospects for the next 120 and beyond. We indeed will keep the marking scheme very close by, and we'll have cause to engage with you.
In the same vein, I will also be keeping the marking close in terms of the management around of GBC. Exactly. I want you,
very important.
I want you to win yourself entirely
off subvention.
That would be my happiest day. That means that I can put those resources into other things.
Vision and progress.
Absolutely.
The Honourable MP for Abra Asebu Kwamankese is also the Chief Government Communicator. He is Minister of in charge of Government Communications. The Honourable Felix Kwachiofosu has been our guest this morning, and he's answered some of our questions about the government's 120 days contract. His commitment is that there will be further commitment for the government and the government appointees going forward for the next 4 years for the duration of the Mahama second administration. Honourable, thank you for sitting with us once again.